April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Calais, France. Oberleutnant Ralph Hermiken's laughter crackled across Luftwaffe radio frequencies as he watched the American fighters climbing toward his formation. Through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, the enemy aircraft looked absurd. Barrel-shaped fuselages, stubby wings, propellers that seemed too large for their bodies. "They've sent us flying milk bottles," he transmitted to his wingman, unable to contain his amusement. Below, 16 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts struggled upward, their massive frames looking hopelessly outmatched. What Hermiken didn't know was that he was watching the arrival of the weapon that would systematically annihilate the Luftwaffe. The transformation would begin with 8 synchronized machine guns. Hermiken had every reason for confidence. He was a veteran of Jagdgeschwader 26, one of the Luftwaffe's elite fighter wings. The unit had been fighting continuously since 1939. Poland, France, Britain, Russia. The pilots circling with him that morning had collected thousands of combat hours. They'd faced Spitfires over the Channel, Hurricanes over London, and Yaks over the Eastern Front. They knew fighters. These American machines looked like nothing they'd seen before. At over 7 tons fully loaded, the P-47s weighed 65% more than the sleek Focke-Wulf 190s. Their radial engines gave them a pregnant, swollen appearance. The greenhouse canopies perched atop the fuselages like afterthoughts. Compared to the knife-edge aerodynamics of German and British fighters, the Thunderbolt seemed almost comically primitive, farm tractors trying to dogfight racehorses. Indianer, one pilot called them, fat targets pretending to be warriors. The Americans climbing toward them were equally green. The 4th Fighter Group had exactly 0 days of combat experience over Europe. Most pilots had fewer than 400 hours total flight time. They were children flying garbage trucks against men who'd survived 4 years of war in purpose-built killing machines. Major Donald Blakesley, leading the 335th Fighter Squadron, understood what his pilots didn't yet grasp. The former Eagle Squadron veteran had transitioned from Spitfires just weeks earlier. He knew the P-47 couldn't turn with German fighters, couldn't climb with them at medium altitude, couldn't match their nimble handling in traditional dogfighting. But Blakesley also knew something the laughing Germans didn't. The P-47 carried 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, 8 M2 Browning machine guns capable of firing 6,000 rounds per minute combined. Enough concentrated firepower to saw a Messerschmitt in half in under 2 seconds. Armor plating that could stop 20mm cannon shells. An engine that maintained full power at altitudes where German fighters gasped for oxygen. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those broad wings. Hermiken's laughter would haunt German intelligence files for the next 2 years. But that morning, watching the ungainly Americans struggle upward, he had no idea he was witnessing the beginning of the end. What happened next would change everything. The P-47's genesis began 3 years earlier, born from panic. June 1940. France was collapsing. German fighters dominated European skies with a speed and ferocity that shocked American observers. Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the U.S. Army Air Corps. Create a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the Luftwaffe's best. His response was audacious. "It will be a dinosaur," he admitted to his design team at Republic's Long Island facility. "But it will be a dinosaur with very good proportions." The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. The massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, 18 cylinders arranged in 2 radial rows, produced 2,000 horsepower, more than any single-engined fighter in existence. But the real innovation sat behind the cockpit. A turbo-supercharger system with complex ducting snaking through the rear fuselage, giving the aircraft its distinctive pot-bellied appearance.
Test pilots approaching it for the first time invariably asked the same question: "This thing actually flies?" Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at altitude. The turbo-supercharger, fed by exhaust gases, could maintain sea-level air pressure to the engine at 30,000 feet. Where conventional fighters choked in thin air, the P-47 thrived. At altitudes where German pilots struggled for oxygen, the Thunderbolt was just reaching its element. But turning vision into combat reality nearly destroyed the program. Major Hubbard Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially despised the aircraft. Between September 1942 and January 1943, his unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in the first months of combat. The aircraft ground-looped viciously on landing. Its immense torque rolled inexperienced pilots inverted on takeoff. Most terrifying, it dove with such enthusiasm that pilots discovered compressibility, their controls freezing solid as shock waves formed on the wings, approaching the speed of sound. Several aircraft disintegrated in mid-air, simply came apart as pilots tried to pull out of high-speed dives. "It's trying to kill us," one pilot wrote home. "The Germans won't have to." Yet those who survived the learning curve discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Lawton, Oklahoma, described his first successful flight. "It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it so much as aim it." The cockpit was spacious compared to cramped European fighters. Visibility was excellent. The controls, once mastered, were precise and responsive. And the guns, 8 M2 Brownings mounted in the wings, represented more firepower than entire squadrons had carried in the previous war. By March 1943, 3 fighter groups were declared combat-ready: the 4th, the 5th, and the 78th. The aircraft had been debugged, mostly. Pilots had learned to respect its quirks. Tactics were being developed. But none of them knew if any of it would work against veteran German fighters in actual combat. The answer came in the skies over France that April, and initially it wasn't the answer anyone wanted. The first combat missions confirmed every German prejudice.
April 15, 1943. The 4th Fighter Group's P-47s flew their inaugural escort mission over the French coast. The Thunderbolts couldn't reach the bomber's altitude in time. When the Focke-Wulf 190s attacked from above, the Americans tried to turn with them, exactly the wrong tactic. 2 P-47s went down, 0 German losses. April 29th, another disaster. The 56th Fighter Group encountered Messerschmitt Bf-109s over Saint-Omer. The German fighters climbed above the struggling Thunderbolts, then dove through the formation in slashing attacks. 3 more P-47s destroyed, 1 German claimed. May 4th, Jagdgeschwader 26 bounced a formation of 12 P-47s near Apperville. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. 4 Thunderbolts fell. The Germans lost nothing. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed tactics to exploit every weakness. Attack from below, where the heavy Thunderbolts struggled to maneuver downward. Forced turning fights where agility mattered more than firepower. Climb away when threatened. The P-47s couldn't follow at medium altitudes. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, filed his assessment to Luftwaffe headquarters on May 10th. "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indiana, fat targets pretending to be warriors. I predict this aircraft will be withdrawn from combat within 3 months. It is fundamentally unsuited to fighter operations." The statistics seem to validate German confidence. In their first month of operations, American P-47 units lost 14 aircraft in combat for only 3 confirmed German kills, a catastrophic 4.7 to 1 loss ratio. For comparison, Spitfire squadrons were achieving 2-to-1 or better against the same German units. The RAF, observing from their bases across southern England, quietly suggested the Americans might reconsider their choice of mount. British pilots at shared airfields joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. At least you'd be harder to hit. American pilots were dying while learning what the P-47 couldn't do. It couldn't climb with German fighters below 20,000 feet, couldn't turn inside them at any altitude, couldn't accelerate quickly in level flight. Every traditional fighter tactic developed over decades of aerial combat seemed useless in the bulky Thunderbolt. Morale cratered. Several pilots requested transfers back to P-38 Lightning units. Others wrote home, preparing families for the worst. The aircraft that was supposed to dominate European skies was being dominated. But something strange was happening that German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that were being shot down had absorbed incredible punishment before falling. On May 4th, Lieutenant Harold Comstock's Thunderbolt returned to base with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, shrugged off hits that would have stopped liquid-cooled fighters instantly. More significantly, when P-47s did get their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. May 14th, Lieutenant Robert Johnson caught a diving Focke-Wulf 190 in his gun sight for less than 2 seconds. His combat report was clinical. Open fire at 400 yards. Target aircraft exploded. Both wings separated from fuselage. No parachute observed. The 8.5 caliber machine guns, dismissed by some as inferior to 20mm cannons, created a convergent zone of destruction unlike anything German pilots had experienced. When all 8 guns connected, aircraft didn't just fall, they came apart. German pilots were winning the engagements, but the few Americans who survived were learning, and what they were learning would turn laughter into screams. Then came June 26, 1943, the day everything changed. June 26, 1943, 1420 hours, 28,000 feet over the Pas de Calais. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron was about to become legend. His formation, 48 P-47s from the 56th Fighter Group, was returning from escort duty when German ground controllers vectored 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader 26 into their path. Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland, led the formation. The attack was textbook perfect. The Focke-Wulfs dove from the sun with overwhelming speed advantage, splitting the American formation before the Thunderbolts could react. Johnson, flying tail-end Charlie at the rear of the formation, never saw them coming. The first 20mm cannon shell exploded against his engine cowling. The second struck his left wing root. The third detonated inside the cockpit. His world became fire and metal fragments. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the instrument panel, momentarily blinding him. Something hot sliced across his nose. Blood filled his oxygen mask. His left hand went numb. The control stick kicked violently as another shell destroyed the elevator trim tab.
He tried to bail out, reached up to jettison the canopy. The handle wouldn't move. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it shut with deformed metal. He was trapped at 28,000 feet in a disintegrating aircraft. I'm going to die, Johnson thought with crystalline clarity. I'm 22 years old, and I'm going to die over France, and nobody will ever know what happened. But the P-47 was still flying. Barely. The engine coughed, belched black smoke, then somehow continued running. Johnson leveled the wings and pointed the nose toward England. The aircraft responded, sluggishly, like a wounded animal trying to reach home. Behind him, the formation had scattered. He was alone, 70 miles from the English coast, flying at less than 200 miles per hour.
bleeding, half blind from oil coating the shattered windscreen. Then it got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190. Historical research has never definitively identified the pilot, though several names from JG-26 have been proposed, discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel. What followed became one of the most extraordinary encounters in aerial warfare history. The German pilot positioned himself 200 yards behind Johnson's tail, professional distance, textbook gunnery position. He opened fire with his 4 20mm MG-151 cannons and 2 13mm MG-131 machine guns. The Thunderbolt shuddered as shells walked up the fuselage. The right stabilizer disintegrated. Fire erupted from the wing root. Johnson felt impacts hammering through the airframe like someone beating the aircraft with sledgehammers. He hunched behind the armor plate, making himself as small as possible, and waited to die. The firing stopped. Ammunition exhausted. The P-47 was still flying. Johnson risked the glance in his mirror. The German pilot had pulled alongside, perhaps 50 feet away, close enough that Johnson could see his face clearly. Young, blonde. His expression was no longer confident. It was confused. The German stared at the shredded Thunderbolt, at the oil streaming from the engine, at the missing canopy sections, at the holes torn through the fuselage. His face showed something Johnson would remember for the rest of his life. Disbelief, bordering on fear. The German pilot shook his head slowly, as if trying to understand what he was seeing. Then he repositioned behind Johnson again. He's going to finish me, Johnson thought. The Focke-Wulf's nose lit up with muzzle flashes. Out of cannon ammunition, the German was firing only his 13mm machine guns now. Bullets stitched across the P-47's wings and fuselage. The left aileron separated. More hydraulic lines ruptured. The engine temperature gauge pegged into the red. Still, impossibly, the aircraft flew. The German pilot pulled alongside again. This time his expression had changed completely. The confusion was gone. In its place was something that looked like awe mixed with horror. He was facing something that violated every principle of aerial combat he'd been taught. Aircraft weren't supposed to survive this. Pilots weren't supposed to live through this. For a long moment, the two pilots stared at each other across 50 feet of sky. An Oklahoma farm boy and a dying American fighter, a German veteran in one of the Luftwaffe's finest aircraft. Then, the German pilot did something that neither man would ever fully explain. He gave a slight nod, almost a salute, rolled his Focke-Wulf into a gentle turn, and flew away. Out of ammunition, out of understanding, out of the fight. Johnson nursed the crippled P-47 across the channel. The engine was dying. Cylinder head temperatures exceeded all safety limits. The controls barely responded. He had no hydraulics, no trim, minimal elevator authority. Oil covered the windscreen so completely he had to stick his head out the side to see forward. At 15:07 hours, he spotted the emergency airfield at RAF Manston on the Kent coast. The tower cleared him for immediate landing. Johnson extended the landing gear manually. The hydraulics were gone. He had no flaps, no brakes. One approach, one chance. The P-47 touched down at 140 miles per hour and rolled nearly to the end of the runway before friction stopped it. The engine seized solid the moment Johnson shut it down, the cylinder heads glowing cherry red. He sat in the cockpit unable to move for 5 minutes. Ground crew had to help him out. His flight suit was soaked with blood, hydraulic fluid, and oil. He'd been wounded in 3 places by shell fragments but hadn't realized it during the fight. The crew chief, a technical sergeant named Joe Lynch, walked around the aircraft in silence. He started counting bullet holes, stopped at 200. "Sir, I don't know what the hell this thing is made of, but it ain't aluminum." The damage assessment took 3 days. Over 200 bullet and cannon strikes. 21 20mm cannon hits. The right elevator 70% destroyed. The rudder shredded. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, shot completely through. One cannon shell had exploded 6 inches from Johnson's head, stopped only by the armored glass windscreen. Another had detonated against the armor plate behind his seat, the impact crater clearly visible. By every principle of aeronautical engineering, the aircraft should have broken apart in midair. Instead, it had flown home. The photograph of Johnson's P-47 was classified immediately. Army Air Force intelligence didn't want the Germans to know what their fighters could survive. But word spread through both air forces anyway. Pilots talked. Ground crews whispered. German intelligence officers, interrogating captured Luftwaffe pilots from JG-26, heard the story and initially refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment. It was physically impossible. But the evidence sat on the tarmac at Manston, a flying testament to American engineering. The laughter was beginning to die in German throats. July 1943. The 56th Fighter Group gathered at Halesworth for a tactical briefing that would rewrite American fighter doctrine. Hub Zemke stood before his pilots with Johnson's gun camera film playing on a projector screen. Not the June 26th survival. Johnson had been too busy staying alive to film anything. This was from July 17th, a bomber escort mission over the Ruhr Mali. "Watch," Zemke said.
The film showed a P-47 diving from 32,000 feet. The altimeter unwound like a broken clock, 30,000, 28,000, 25,000. The airspeed indicator climbed past 450 miles per hour, approaching 500. Below, a formation of Messerschmitt Bf-109s was positioned to attack B-17s. The 109s never saw death coming from above. At 22,000 feet, the P-47 leveled briefly. 8.50 caliber streams converged on a single Messerschmitt. For exactly 1.8 seconds, the guns fired. The 109 didn't fall, it exploded. Wings separated from fuselage. The tail section tumbled away independently. What remained was burning fragments. Before the other German pilots could react, the P-47 had converted its speed into a zoom climb back to 28,000 feet, untouchable. The entire engagement lasted 11 seconds. Zemke stopped the projector. "Gentlemen, stop trying to fight their fight. Fight ours." The doctrine that emerged was brutally simple. Don't turn with them, don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight, use your altitude, use your guns. The P-47's massive weight, its greatest apparent weakness, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a Thunderbolt could exceed 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve even in a vertical plunge. This speed differential meant German pilots couldn't track the diving Americans for deflection shooting. By the time they reacted, the P-47 was through their formation and climbing away. Captain Walker Bud Mayhearn, who would become one of America's first European aces, perfected what pilots called boom and zoom, though Mayhearn himself called it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. The tactic was mathematical. Climb to 30 to 32,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. The turbo-supercharged R-2800 engine maintained full power at altitudes where Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts gasped on anemic fuel-air mixtures. Wait, watch, when German fighters appeared below attacking bombers or flying patrol patterns, roll inverted and dive. Terminal velocity solved the pursuit problem. At 500+ miles per hour, deflection shooting became nearly impossible for defending Germans. The P-47 pilot aimed at where the enemy was now, not where they would be. The closure rate was too fast for traditional gunnery mathematics. Then came the moment of reckoning. 8 M2 Brownings spoke in unison. German pilots who survived these attacks described it as facing a wall of lead. Each .5 caliber gun fired 800 rounds per minute. Combined rate, 6,400 rounds per minute. At convergence distance, typically set at 300 yards, all 8 ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. 100 projectiles per second, each weighing 1.6 ounces, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't just fall, they disintegrated. August 17, 1943, the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted to that date. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Me-110 Zerstorer heavy fighters positioning to attack B-17s. The twin-engine 110s were devastating bomber killers, but less maneuverable than single-engine fighters. Schilling's flight of 4 P-47s ruled into attack from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Hinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the 110s, survived the attack. His POW interrogation report, captured in Air Force historical archives, described what happened. The American fighters came down like hammers from God. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits, I saw them strike the leader's wing. The Thunderbolt didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. The wings separated from the fuselage. The tail section tumbled away independently. What remained was burning fragments. 8 110s destroyed in less than 90 seconds. The remaining German pilots broke formation and fled. Several jettisoned their external fuel tanks and rocket armament just to gain speed for escape. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who would finish the war as the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect in his mission report. When you hit them with all 850s converged, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half, the tail section falling one direction, the nose and engine another. The pilot never had a chance to bail out. He never knew what hit him. By September 1943, Luftwaffe intelligence was compiling a disturbing picture. The fat American fighters they'd mocked in April had killed 43 German pilots in August alone. Not shot down, many pilots survived being shot down, killed. The difference was critical. When a Spitfire's 20mm cannon struck a German fighter, pilots often had time to bail out. When 8.5 caliber streams converged on a Focke-Wulf, there was nothing left to bail out from. But the Germans were about to discover something even more terrifying about the Thunderbolt. Its performance didn't just match German fighters at altitude, it exceeded them dramatically. September 1943. The Luftwaffe discovered a nightmare written in thermodynamics. The P-47's turbo supercharger, that ungainly bulge in the rear fuselage that made the aircraft look pregnant, was rewriting the rules of high-altitude combat. While German fighters relied on mechanical superchargers that compressed intake air through engine-driven impellers, the Thunderbolt used exhaust gases to spin a turbine that force-fed the engine. The difference became lethal above 25,000 feet. A Focke-Wulf 190's BMW 801 radial engine produced 1,700 horsepower at sea level. At 25,000 feet, it dropped to barely 1,000 horsepower. The engine gasped on thin air, starved for oxygen. At 28,000 feet, the 190 was sluggish, unresponsive, a shadow of its low-altitude performance. The P-47's R-2800 Double Wasp produced 2,000 horsepower at sea level. At 28,000 feet, it still produced 2,000 horsepower. The turbo supercharger maintained sea-level air density to the engine regardless of altitude. German pilots were fighting with one hand tied behind their backs. Americans were fighting with both fists. October 8, 1943. 28,000 feet over Bremen. Oberlieutenant Hans Philipp led Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation. Philipp was no novice. He had 206 confirmed victories, earned over 500 combat missions on both Eastern and Western fronts. He was one of Germany's most experienced aces, a recipient of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. None of it mattered. P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group were stacked above the bombers at 31,000 feet. Robert Johnson, now a seasoned combat veteran with 6 kills, spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf leading the German formation upward. At 31,000 feet, Johnson's Thunderbolt handled crisply. The controls responded precisely. The engine purred with smooth, unrestricted power. Below him, Philipp's Focke-Wulf wallowed through the thin air like a truck climbing a mountain road. The BMW 801 engine was delivering perhaps 800 horsepower. The controls were mushy. Climbing another 1,000 feet would take minutes the German pilot didn't have. Johnson rolled inverted and dove. His combat report, filed at 1640 hours that day, was clinical. Engaged enemy aircraft at 28,000 feet. Target FW-190 with elaborate nose art, yellow cowling markings. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection, observed strikes along entire fuselage and wing routes. Enemy aircraft exploded at 1547 hours. Debris fell in multiple pieces. No parachute observed.
Hans Philipp, one of Germany's best, died without ever achieving a firing position. His Focke-Wulf, handicapped by altitude, couldn't maneuver, couldn't accelerate, couldn't escape. The kill shocked the Luftwaffe. If Philipp, a man who'd survived combat against Soviet fighters, RAF Spitfires, and American P-38s, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? The answer came in the casualty reports. September 1943, 31 Luftwaffe pilots killed on the Western Front. October, 47. November, 62. The numbers climbed steadily.
German High Command ordered an immediate investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report, delivered to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in November 1943, made for sobering reading. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any operational German fighter could reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor included 3 8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, half-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates around the engine cowling. Most disturbingly, its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 conventional fighters and still return home. The report concluded with a stark assessment. At altitudes above 25,000 feet, the P-47 is superior to all current Luftwaffe fighters in speed, climb rate, and sustained combat power. Defensive tactics are ineffective. Offensive tactics result in unacceptable losses. Recommend avoiding engagement above 20,000 feet whenever possible. But avoiding engagement wasn't an option. The American bombers flew at 25,000, 28,000 feet. The P-47s flew above them. To reach the bombers, German fighters had to climb into the Thunderbolt's killing zone. It was a trap with no escape. Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, wrote in his diary on November 15th, "The fat American fighters have learned to use their advantages. Needless, we no longer laugh. We die at altitude while they circle above like eagles waiting for prey. The sky above 25,000 feet belongs to them now. We cannot follow." But the nightmare was only beginning. In January 1944, a new variant arrived in England that would eliminate the P-47's last weakness. January 1944. The P-47 D-22 variant began arriving at English airfields with a modification that erased the Thunderbolt's final vulnerability. The new Hamilton Standard hydromatic propeller featured paddle blades, 13 feet in diameter, with broad chord blades that bit into the air like massive oars. The difference was immediately visible. Where earlier propellers looked delicate, almost elegant, these looked brutal, functional, oversized. The performance improvement was dramatic. Earlier P-47s climbed at 200 feet per minute at sea level, anemic compared to German fighters. The paddle blade variants achieved 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s at most altitudes. The massive propeller also improved acceleration, allowing P-47s to build energy faster in level flight. The Germans had mocked the early Thunderbolts for climbing like pregnant cows. That insult no longer applied. February 12, 1944. Near Hanover, Hauptmann Heinz Knoke of Jagdgeschwader 11 led a staffel of 12 Bf 109s to intercept a B-17 formation. They climbed to 26,000 feet, positioning for a diving attack on the bombers. P-47s appeared above them at 29,000 feet. Standard procedure. The Americans always held altitude advantage. Knoke's formation tightened up. The plan was simple: make one fast pass at the bombers, then dive away before the Thunderbolts could react. Then the P-47s did something impossible. They turned into the German formation and climbed. Not a shallow climb to maintain energy. An aggressive, sustained climb that matched the Messerschmitt's rate. Knoke watched in disbelief as the American fighters closed the 3,000-foot altitude gap in less than 90 seconds. His Bf-10s were at full combat power, their Daimler-Benz engines screaming. The Thunderbolts were climbing with them effortlessly. At 28,500 feet, The P-47s opened fire. Lieutenant Schmidt, flying at the rear of Knocke's formation, simply exploded. One moment, an aircraft, the next, an expanding cloud of debris and fire. Knocke ordered the formation to dive. Standard escape tactic. Get to lower altitude where the heavy Americans couldn't follow efficiently. The P-47s followed, stayed with them through the dive. When Knocke tried to pull up at 18,000 feet, converting dive speed to altitude, the Thunderbolts matched the maneuver. 2 more Messerschmitts died in the climb. The remaining German fighters scattered, jinking desperately, abandoning any thought of attacking the bombers. Knocke wrote in his combat diary that evening, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual altitude advantage once they dove. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage by diving, they followed us down. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year. They have become deadly at every altitude." But the paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive roar created by the blade tips approaching supersonic speeds could be heard from miles away. A deep, threatening rumble that rolled across the sky like thunder. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, even before visual contact. They began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap.
The sound meant death from above. When you heard that rolling thunder, you had perhaps 30 seconds to find cover before 8.50 caliber machine guns turned your position into shredded metal and meat. Psychological warfare officers noted a spike in German combat stress cases in early 1944. Soldiers who had endured Soviet artillery barrages and British bombing raids without breaking were developing panic symptoms at the sound of P-47 engines. The fat fighter the German pilots had mocked was now causing nervous breakdowns just by flying overhead. And it was about to get worse, much worse. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany, over 1,000 miles from English bases. The Luftwaffe's safe zones were evaporating. April 1944. As P-51 Mustangs began arriving to take over long-range bomber escort duties, P-47 units transitioned to a new role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal: ground attack. The Thunderbolt's rugged construction, designed to survive combat damage at altitude, proved equally effective against anti-aircraft fire. The massive radial engine could absorb 20mm flak hits that would instantly destroy liquid-cooled inline engines. Armor plating that protected pilots from fighter attacks also shielded them from ground fire. But it was the addition of ordnance that transformed the P-47 into a flying apocalypse. The P-47 D-25 variant could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage, a bomb load equal to early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Combined with 8.50 caliber machine guns and 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a single P-47 carried more firepower than an infantry company. And the Americans were sending them in groups of 48. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzergrenadier Regiment, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand during the Normandy campaign. His post-war memoir described the terror. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces through the canopy glass. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming off the rails. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist in one pass. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The entire attack lasted perhaps 15 seconds. Von Luck continued. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them JBOs, fighter bombers. But these were something beyond that terminology. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers and the persistence of wolves. You couldn't hide from them. Camouflage didn't work. They found you, and when they found you, you died. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion fleet, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. The Luftwaffe attempted to reach the landing zones. It was a massacre. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II was only one of 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that morning. His after-action report, "The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn, 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. I saw Hartmann's 190 hit. It didn't fall. It disintegrated. Just fragments tumbling into the channel." In the weeks following D-Day, P-47 systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. June 1944 alone, 651 locomotives destroyed, 3,847 trucks destroyed, 512 tanks and armored vehicles destroyed, 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. Panzer divisions that should have reached Normandy in hours took days, arriving piecemeal, their fuel trucks and supply columns burning along Norman roads. The standard P-47 ground attack profile became devastatingly efficient. 4-ship flights would patrol assigned sectors at 8,000 feet, high enough to spot movement but low enough to dive quickly. When targets were identified, a convoy, a train, a tank column, the flight would roll into a 30-degree dive. At 3,000 feet, rockets launched. 10 5-inch HVARs per aircraft, 40 total per flight. Each rocket could penetrate 4 inches of armor. Against soft targets like trucks or trains, they were catastrophically effective. At 1,500 feet, the 50-caliber guns opened up. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds walked through vehicles like a buzzsaw. Fuel tanks exploded. Ammunition cooked off. Men burned. The P-47s would pull up at 500 feet, climb back to 8,000, and repeat. Some pilots made 6 passes on a single target area before exhausting ammunition and ordnance. Unteroffizier Karl Müller, a Panzer IV tank commander who survived a P-47 attack near Caen, described the experience in a POW interrogation. "We heard them before we saw them, that rolling thunder sound. I ordered the crew to button up, and we stopped in a tree line. Then the rockets came. The tank next to us exploded, direct hit through the top armor. Then the machine gun fire. It sounded like rain on the hull, except each raindrop was a half-inch bullet traveling faster than sound. The noise inside was unbearable. We couldn't see, couldn't hear commands, couldn't do anything but wait and pray."
Müller continued. "When the guns finally stopped, I looked outside. 3 of our 5 tanks were burning. The truck column behind us was gone, just craters and fire. The attack lasted maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes felt like hours. The Germans tried everything to counter the P-47 threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed elaborate camouflage techniques, and moved in smaller, dispersed groups. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made it nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 88mm flak guns, designed to destroy heavy bombers, struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. Pilots who survived anti-aircraft fire learned to jink violently during attack runs, making deflection shooting nearly impossible. By July 1944, German commanders estimated that 70% of vehicles destroyed in France fell to air attack, most of those to P-47s. General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel, commanding Army Group B in Normandy, reported to Hitler on July 15th. "Daytime movement is suicidal. The American fighter bombers control the roads absolutely. We have lost more vehicles to air attack in 6 weeks than we lost in 6 months in North Africa." 2 days later, Rommel's staff car was strafed by P-47s. The field marshal suffered a fractured skull and was evacuated from France. The Thunderbolt had gone from laughingstock to force of nature. But even as it devastated Europe, the P-47 was simultaneously proving its worth in an entirely different war, half a world away. October 11, 1943, 18,000 feet over Wewak, New Guinea. Colonel Neil Kirby led 4 P-47 Thunderbolts against 40 Japanese aircraft, a mix of K-43 Oscar fighters and K-61 Tony interceptors. The odds were 10-1. The engagement would last 12 minutes. When it ended, Kirby had shot down 6 enemy aircraft himself. His wingmen claimed 3 more. The Japanese lost 13 aircraft total. All 4 P-47s returned to base. For this action, Kirby received the Medal of Honor. But the real story was what the engagement revealed about the P-47 in Pacific combat. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from primitive New Guinea airfields, discovered that the Thunderbolt's qualities were perfectly suited to the Pacific theater. The vast distances required range. The P-47's internal fuel capacity and ability to carry drop tanks solved that. The harsh tropical environment destroyed delicate aircraft. The rugged Thunderbolt shrugged off conditions that grounded other fighters. Most critically, Japanese fighters were designed around different principles than German aircraft. Ultra-lightweight, extremely maneuverable, but fragile. The Zero, Oscar, and other Japanese fighters had no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, minimal structural strength. They were paper tigers compared to the armored Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts. Against the P-47's 8.5 caliber machine guns, they simply evaporated. Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 64 confirmed victories, encountered P-47s over Rabaul in late 1943. His post-war memoir described the shock. "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannons, which could destroy a P-40 Warhawk with a few hits, seemed to have no effect on the Thunderbolts. I put dozens of rounds into one and watched it fly away, apparently undamaged. Their return fire was terrifying, streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart. I saw a K-43 disintegrate under one burst, just fragments falling into the ocean." The P-47's tactics in the Pacific mirrored those developed in Europe. Altitude advantage, boom and zoom attacks, never turning with the more nimble Japanese fighters. But the killing was easier. Japanese aircraft were more fragile. A 1-second burst that might damage a Focke-Wulf would obliterate a Zero. By mid-1944, the P-47N variant was developed specifically for the Pacific. It featured enlarged fuel tanks, wet wings holding 93 gallons each, extending range to 2,350 miles. This allowed Thunderbolts to escort B-29 superfortresses on missions to Japan itself, a role the short-legged fighter of 1943 could never have imagined. The final proof of the P-47's versatility came in its ground attack role against Japanese shipping and installations. The same tactics devastating German columns in France proved equally effective against Japanese barges, trucks, and supply depots across the Pacific Islands. On Okinawa, P-47s of the 318th Fighter Group flew close air support missions that essentially invented modern ground attack doctrine. Working with forward air controllers, Thunderbolts could put rockets and machine gun fire on targets within minutes of request, with accuracy measured in meters. But perhaps the ultimate vindication of the P-47's design came when it faced the future itself, jet aircraft. And once again, the fat fighter everyone had underestimated proved it could kill what shouldn't be killable.
November 27, 1944. 28,000 feet over central Germany. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group spotted something that shouldn't exist in a propeller-driven fighter pilot's world. A Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter streaking across the sky at 540 miles per hour. The Me-262 represented the future. Twin Junkers UMO 004 turbojets, producing 1,980 pounds of thrust each. Top speed, nearly 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter. Armament of 4 30mm cannons, capable of destroying a bomber with a single burst. In theory, the jet was untouchable by propeller aircraft. In practice, physics and tactics created vulnerabilities. Meyer understood both. The Me-262 pilot, confident in his speed advantage, made a fundamental mistake. He flew streak and level, probably assuming no Allied fighter could catch him. He didn't see Meyer's P-47 at 31,000 feet, 3,000 feet above and 2 miles behind. Meyer rolled inverted and dove. The Thunderbolt accelerated like a falling anvil, 400 miles per hour, 450, 480. At 28,000 feet, Meyer was indicating 500 miles per hour, fast enough to match the jet in level flight, if only for a few seconds. The convergence geometry was perfect. The Me-262 pilot never knew death was coming from above. Meyer opened fire at 400 yards. His combat report, filed at 17:15 hours, was clinical. Observed strikes along fuselage and both engine nacelles. Enemy aircraft disintegrated. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from airframe. Pilot did not escape. The concentrated fire of 8.5 caliber guns proved more effective than anticipated against jet aircraft construction. The Me-262's aluminum airframe, designed for speed rather than combat damage resistance, couldn't withstand what a rugged Focke-Wulf 190 might have survived. The jet came apart under the hammer of 50 caliber fire. But catching jets in level flight was rare. Most P-47 jet kills came during the jet's most vulnerable moments, takeoff and landing. Me-262s required long, smooth runways. They accelerated slowly on the ground. During landing approach, their speed dropped below 200 miles per hour, slower than a P-47 could dive. American fighters began loitering near known jet bases, waiting for the vulnerable moments. The Luftwaffe responded by putting up massive flak defenses around jet airfields. The Americans countered with specialized high-speed variants. March 1945. The P-47M arrived in Europe, with water methanol injection boosting the R-2800 engine to 2,800 horsepower and refined aerodynamics reducing drag. These ultimate Thunderbolts could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet, fast enough to intercept even jets under certain conditions. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron, equipped with P-47Ms, shot down 2 Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized firepower over speed. The jets are faster, but they can't turn and they can't take punishment. One good burst from our battery and they come apart like they're made of paper. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we get them. The key is patience and altitude. Stay above them. Wait for them to commit, then drop on them like a brick. The success rate was telling. Against Me-262s, P-47s achieved approximately 15 confirmed kills.
Not many in absolute terms, but remarkable given the jet's supposed invulnerability. Even the future couldn't escape the thunder. But the final proof of American industrial dominance and the P-47's role in it came on New Year's Day, 1945, when the Luftwaffe gambled everything on one desperate attack. January 1st, 1945, 09:20 hours. Allied airfields across Belgium, the Netherlands, and northern France. Nearly 900 German fighters, the largest Luftwaffe operation in months, launched coordinated surprise attacks on Allied airfields. Operation Bodenplatte, baseplate. Germany's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power on the ground and buy breathing room for their collapsing fronts. At Y-34 Airfield near Metz, home to the 352nd Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s swept in at treetop level, catching most aircraft on the ground. Cannon fire raked the flight line. Fuel trucks exploded. Maintenance tents burned. Ground crew casualties were significant. The German pilots strafed the airfield repeatedly, their confidence growing with each pass. This was what they'd been promised, a crippling blow against American air superiority. One captured German pilot, brought to the command post after his Bf 109 was shot down by anti-aircraft fire, watched the burning flight line with visible satisfaction. He pointed at the destroyed P-47s and taunted his captors. "What do you think of that, Americans? Your Air Force burns." Major George Brooking, the 9th Air Force's operations officer, looked at the smoking wreckage, then at the German pilot. His response became legendary throughout the 9th Air Force. He pointed to the flight line, where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing hard stands for replacements. "What do I think? By tomorrow morning, we'll have 40 new Thunderbolts sitting on that ramp. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared.
Brooking wasn't exaggerating. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47 D-40s were flying in from supply depots in England. By January 4th, the 365th Fighter Group was back to full strength. 72 hours from attack to complete operational recovery. The Luftwaffe never recovered from Bodenplatte. The final accounting was devastating. German losses: 271 aircraft destroyed, 214 fighters shot down by Allied fighters and anti-aircraft fire, 57 more lost to accidents, fuel exhaustion, and operational failures. More critically, 213 pilots killed or captured. Among them were 3 Geschwaderkommandore, 5 Gruppenkommandore, and dozens of experienced flight leaders. These were irreplaceable losses. Many of the dead pilots were instructors pulled from training schools, men the Luftwaffe couldn't afford to lose under any circumstances. Their students, already receiving minimal training due to fuel shortages, now had no one to teach them. Allied losses totaled 134 aircraft across all attacked airfields, nearly all destroyed on the ground. Pilot casualties were minimal. Most weren't in their aircraft when the attacks came. The Americans lost 134 aircraft, all replaced within 1 week. The mathematics of industrial warfare had never been clearer. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale factory on Long Island was producing 1 P-47 every hour, round the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana, built from empty farmland in 1942, was manufacturing 500 aircraft per month by late 1944. Both factories operated 3 shifts, 24 hours daily. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, 300 pounds of rubber. The R-2800 engine alone contained 2,400 individual components machined to tolerances of 1,000th of an inch.
Yet American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision that exceeded peacetime standards. Quality control inspectors rejected components for defects measured in 10,000ths of an inch. Total P-47 production by war end, 15,683 aircraft. The ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, ammunition consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, one of several ammunition plants, produced 30 million rounds monthly. Each cartridge manufactured to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch, ensuring reliable feeding through synchronized gun mechanisms even under high-G maneuvering. Fuel consumption was enormous. Each Thunderbolt burned 100 gallons per hour in normal cruise, up to 300 gallons in combat, with water methanol injection engaged. The 9th Air Force alone consumed over 25 million gallons of 100-octane aviation fuel monthly by late 1944. All of it shipped across the Atlantic in tankers that themselves were products of American mass production. Liberty ships built in weeks, sometimes days, replacing losses faster than U-boats could sink them. But perhaps even more impressive than aircraft production was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained in the entire war to that point. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours flight training before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighters. German pilots, by contrast, were entering combat with less than 100 hours total flight time by war end. Some had fewer than 50 hours. They were sent against American pilots who'd practiced formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and air combat maneuvering for nearly a year. The quality showed in combat. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, typified the American training advantage. I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 hours in the P-47. I'd fired thousands of rounds at towed targets, practicing deflection shooting. I'd studied gun camera film from actual combat. I knew German aircraft recognition cold. My first mission, I knew exactly what to do, how to position, when to shoot. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight. By early 1945, the average American P-47 pilot had over 200 hours of combat experience. The average Luftwaffe fighter pilot had less than 30 hours. Experience mattered. Training mattered. But what mattered most was the industrial capacity to keep replacing losses faster than the enemy could inflict them. The Germans had courage, skill, and tactical brilliance. The Americans had factories, fuel, and an endless supply of trained pilots flying aircraft that couldn't be killed. Courage couldn't stop a P-47's 8 machine guns. Skill couldn't survive when outnumbered 10-1 by pilots just as skilled and far better trained. Tactical brilliance meant nothing when you had no fuel to fly, no ammunition to shoot, no replacement aircraft when yours was destroyed. The Luftwaffe was bleeding to death, and the men who'd laughed at the flying milk bottles in April 1943 were finally ready to admit it.
The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. It climbed like it was falling upward. The cockpit was comfortable, spacious. Visibility was excellent. The controls were precise. It was a pilot's aircraft, wrapped in armor that could stop our cannons. But what really impressed me was realizing that America built over 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war. Each one required an engine more sophisticated than anything we produced. Yet they built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns? We called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound, like piano keys being hammered. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it.
Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe. It destroyed it, systematically, completely. The confession was complete. The men who'd laughed had become the men who feared, and finally, the men who admitted defeat. But what really made the P-47 truly lethal wasn't just its combat performance. It was the engineering philosophy behind it. American industrial philosophy taken to its ultimate expression. The P-47 represented American industrial philosophy perfectly. Brute force engineering backed by unlimited resources. Every component was overbuilt, overpowered, over-engineered. The wing spars could support 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's maximum loaded weight. The engine mount could withstand 12 G-forces, far exceeding anything a human pilot could survive. Control cables were doubled throughout with automatic backup systems. If one failed, the redundant system engaged seamlessly. The ammunition feed system alone was a marvel of mechanical engineering. 8 separate ammunition boxes, each holding 425 rounds, fed through electric boost motors to prevent jamming during high-G maneuvers. The guns were electrically heated to prevent freezing at altitude, a detail German designers never incorporated. Each gun had its own charging mechanism and could be individually synchronized. Convergence distance was adjustable between 150 and 400 yards, allowing pilots to optimize for their preferred engagement range. The system worked flawlessly. Unlike German fighters whose cannons frequently jammed or whose limited ammunition ran out after seconds of firing, the P-47's guns fired until empty, every time, at any altitude, in any maneuver. Post-war analysis of combat effectiveness revealed why machine guns proved superior to cannons in actual fighting. German 20mm cannons packed more punch per shell. A single hit could cripple an aircraft. But they carried limited ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds total. At 600 rounds per minute firing rate, that meant 12 to 20 seconds of fire time. In combat, with maneuvering and missed shots, a pilot might get 2, maybe 3 good bursts before running dry. The P-47's 8 50 caliber Brownings carried 3,400 rounds combined. At 800 rounds per minute per gun, 6,400 combined, that provided over 30 seconds of continuous fire. But pilots never fired continuously. They fired in 2-second bursts, meaning a P-47 could make 15 separate attacks before exhausting ammunition. More critically, the probability mathematics favored the American approach. Cannons required precise aim, hit the target with the shell. Machine guns created a probability cloud. At convergence distance, 8 guns firing simultaneously put approximately 100 projectiles into a 6-foot diameter zone every second. The target aircraft, typically 30 feet long and 40 feet across, couldn't avoid being hit. Multiple hits were guaranteed. The ammunition itself exploited superior American metallurgy and chemistry. The standard armor-piercing incendiary round used a delayed action fuse that ensured penetration before detonation. The tungsten carbide core punched through aluminum skin and internal structure. Then, the incendiary compound, burning at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, ignited fuel, hydraulics, ammunition. German 20mm Minengeschoss shells, while heavier, often exploded on surface contact. Spectacular but sometimes superficial damage. The American rounds penetrated first, ensuring internal destruction. Analysis of gun camera footage from 1944 to 45 showed the difference. German cannon hits created visual explosions and smoke. American 50 caliber hits often looked less dramatic initially, then the target aircraft simply came apart. Wings folded, tails separated, fuselages broke in half. The engineering extended to survivability features German designers never prioritized. The R2800 radial engine could lose 3 cylinders and continue running.
Liquid-cooled German engines stopped instantly if a single coolant line was severed. The P-47's oil system included multiple redundant lines. Fuel tanks were self-sealing. Bullets passed through, rubber lining expanded to close the hole. German fighters lacked this until very late in the war. The cockpit armor was comprehensive. A 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot's head and back, half-inch bulletproof windscreen, armored deflection plates around the engine and cockpit sides. A pilot sitting in a P-47 was effectively inside an armored capsule. Robert Johnson's survival, absorbing over 200 hits, including direct 20mm cannon strikes, wasn't luck. It was engineering. The same engineering philosophy that built Liberty ships in days, Sherman tanks by the thousands, and atomic bombs in secret cities. American industry didn't try to build the most elegant solution. They built the solution that worked, that could be mass-produced, that could survive the chaos of combat and bring pilots home. Brute force, overwhelming firepower, redundancy at every level, resources deployed without limit. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't subtle, but it worked. The final accounting of destruction proved it. The numbers defied comprehension. European theater, P-47 Thunderbolt operations. 3,752 German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat. 3,315 aircraft destroyed on the ground. 86,000 railway cars destroyed. 9,000 locomotives destroyed. 6,000 armored fighting vehicles destroyed. 68,000 trucks destroyed. 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. Countless bridges, fuel depots, ammunition dumps, and command posts obliterated. Pacific Theater,